Row Country is a game that looks like a Playmobil toy set viewed through a pixel filter, and harks back to the era of the original PlayStation. But beyond the nostalgia bait is a fantastically constructed survival horror game whose atmosphere, puzzles, and story come together to create something special. The combat isn't especially challenging, but it's a worthy addition to both the current survival horror renaissance and the genre as a whole. Developed by brothers Tom and Adam Vian of SFB Games, Crow Country began as Adam's hobby project and, as he puts it, accidentally grew into a full-size game. Likewise, the look of the game came from his not being able to render 3D models of real people. But sometimes the best creations are the results of happy accidents, and that's certainly the case with what we get here. The game sees you play as Agent Mara Forrest, who is in search of the missing entrepreneur Edward Crow. Journeying to the abandoned theme park named after him, and from which the game's title comes, she must solve various puzzles in order to open up the location and uncover clues about Crow's whereabouts. In the process, she sees that something is very wrong in the park beyond just the majorly creepy vibes that are inherent to an abandoned theme park, with all sorts of misshapen oddities emerging to pose a threat to her progress. It's hard to say more about the story without giving it away, so for the purpose of this video, I'll just say that once you come to the conclusion, it's deceptively straightforward, and yet it never feels too obvious. The origins of the monsters and the way events unfold fit perfectly into the dark, slightly camp 90s sci-fi vibe, with an added dose of dry wit and sarcasm to boot. It's an extremely enjoyable narrative that's self-aware both in regards to the story and the gameplay genres it stands in, and yet never surrenders the creepiness to become a mere parody of itself. It's fun, chilling, funny, and dark in the right measure. The presentation complements this approach perfectly. The game has a great sound design, both Mara's movements and the enemies having a clunkiness befitting PS1 era survival horror, and a hint of the mechanical that you'd expect when everyone and everything looks like a toy. And yet you can feel the emptiness and isolation of the setting, the wrongness of amusement park rides and locations lacking for human traffic, and a sadness underneath the weirdness. The music evokes classic survival horror soundtracks such as Resident Evil and Silent Hill, whilst maintaining its own identity. The art direction and the text-only dialogue bring all the pieces together, for a game where the retro aesthetic leans into the horror in a way that it's likely a more photorealistic game would be less effective at evoking the creepiness we get here. None of this would matter, however, if the level design and gameplay fell short. Thankfully, that is definitely not the case. As with all good survival horror games, Crow Country gives you what eventually turns out to be quite a large, open-ended environment, but which starts off narrow with limited options. Only by solving puzzles, finding keys, and unlocking shortcuts back to where you were do you finally get to see everything. And as you do, the options for where to go increase, requiring you to keep track of what still needs doing and which key items or puzzle solutions are still outstanding. The maps that you find make that task a little more straightforward, highlighting where an unsolved puzzle or a mystery remains. But you're still likely to find yourself tracking back and forth as you figure out what you can and can't do next. The map doesn't highlight where locks are, for example, the keys you found might fit. So it's absolutely necessary to take a note of the environment and explore properly. In doing that, it's worth noting that although you're not dealing with an over-the-shoulder camera, you also aren't dealing with fixed cameras. You can adjust the camera angle, and doing so will both allow you to see things you might otherwise miss, as well as make traversal around obstacles or combat with enemies coming from odd angles easier. Though there are mechanisms to provide hints if you need them, these are optional, and equally you can have that feeling from older games of being left to your own devices to figure it all out. This brings us to the puzzles. Some are as simple as finding a key item to open a door, but they do range in complexity. Like the story, there's a deceptive simplicity to them, so it's often likely you'll be stumped by overthinking a puzzle rather than having no clue where to start from. But all of them require at least some degree of reading clues and utilising the environment in order to solve them. They feel well put together, and the balance between providing a challenge and not holding gameplay up altogether feels right. There was only one instance where a puzzle solution felt completely out of reach to me. This was because it required assistance, and I wasn't sure where to get it. The answer to that feeling counterintuitive, opening something which I was certain would spawn an enemy. But this provided an interesting way of linking the story and gameplay progression, whilst challenging what I thought I knew about how things worked. There is at least one puzzle with more than one possible solution as well. One of these being to find an object which you can use both as a weapon and, here, a key item. The other being a key item which allows you to manipulate the environment. I can't say whether there were others with more than one answer, but it was refreshing to see this as a possibility at least the one time. For anyone out there who does struggle with the puzzles, however, there is a fortune teller booth where you can use up to 10 credits in order to access hints. These hints will focus on your current main unsolved puzzle, giving you first a general hint and then the solution if you use more than one credit on it. This is great as both an accessibility option and as a way to preserve that classic experience for those who don't want hints from the game, since you have to actively seek out and request hints. In the same vein, the ability to choose to play Crow Country as either a survival horror or as a creepy puzzle adventure with no enemies is an equally innovative way of allowing people to play as they choose and increasing the accessibility of the game. If you do choose to play it as a survival horror game, perhaps the one significant thing to note here is that it's not actually that difficult to deal with the enemies. As with any survival horror game, you have limited resources and will have to choose between fighting and avoiding enemies in a strategic way. Do you use up resources or risk having to dodge past an enemy again and again? In the latter case, the central corridor of the park in particular will over time absolutely fill up with enemies so that you're practically going everywhere in a zigzag. Stopping and fighting does present a challenge because of the awkward aiming system. It's very easy to miss because the laser aim doesn't stay in place, and being planted in position does allow other enemies to get closer as you take aim. However, choosing to forgo this in favour of dodging doesn't present the same risk, even when there's a whole load of enemies in an area. It's actually deceptively simple to weave through them and preserve your resources without too much worry. I died just once in my playthrough, in a rather tight endgame area, but this wasn't because it was a tough area, rather because I decided to fight and misused a grenade instead of simply running through. And dodging virtually every enemy is also the only time you'll really come up against the limits of the inventory system. You have enough space to carry all the weapons and key items you will find, and only risk running out of space if you have too many health kits, or too many antidotes, or too many bullets, and can't carry more. But there are no strategic decisions to be made on what to carry versus what to use. As though you may reach your handgun bullet limit, it doesn't impact on your health kit, antidote, or other ammo limit, and you hit those separately. With that said, not all survival horror games necessarily need the same kind of resource management systems. And where I found avoiding enemies simple enough, that's unlikely to be the case for newcomers to the genre. Crow Country may not be a hard game, on the level of, say, Tormented Souls, but that doesn't mean it's without challenge. It's just that the focus of the gameplay is far more on the puzzles than on enemies and resource management, and that's an entirely valid choice. I mention this mainly because, if survival horror veterans want to be challenged on that side of the game, it may be worth actively choosing to engage in combat more often. Overall, while Crow Country has its nostalgic appeal, and is very clearly a love letter to classic survival horror, it very much stands on its own 2 feet. Focusing very strongly on puzzles over combat, it also serves as a potential gateway drug to those new to the genre, with both a puzzle-only mode and a combat difficulty that's not as uncompromisingly tough as other titles. But even if it's easier, its shortcomings are few, and I would even peg it as a future classic in an era in which the survival horror genre is very definitively back. Is Crow Country on your radar? And if so, are you a newcomer to survival horror or a long-standing fan? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member-supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.